Hello, everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome to How I Built This Resilience Edition from NPR. I'm Guy Raz. It's great to see you all. This is, of course, where we talk about how businesses are building resilience into their organizations in these challenging times. So welcome back. This is our first episode of the new year, and what a new year it's been. Before we begin, I want to thank NerdWallet with their podcast Smart Money for their support of this series. We can't predict the future, but being educated and aware of our world, especially the financial world, helps stay ahead of your finances by subscribing to NerdWallet's Smart Money podcast, offering weekly updates on financial news and answers to the year's most pressing questions in home buying, in investments, and mortgage rates, and of course, credit cards. You can listen and subscribe to NerdWallet's Smart Money podcast wherever you listen to your favorite show. So thank you so much for your support of this series. Okay, on to today. My guest is Elisa Villanueva Beard. She's a Teach for America alumna who is now the CEO. Teach for America core members reach hundreds of thousands of students each year all across the United States in nearly 2,300 schools, 37 states, and the District of Columbia. It's a pretty incredible program. And for those of you who haven't heard it, I interviewed the founder, Wendy Kopp, on How I Built This back in 2017. So you can go back and check that out. I can't wait to talk to Elisa about what it's been like to lead with resilience this past year. Welcome, Elisa. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Guy. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And anyone watching on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, you can submit questions to us. Please do so, and I will try to get to as many of those as I can. So first of all, Lisa, for those who might not know, can you just briefly explain how Teach for America works?
Absolutely. So Teach for America exists because today in our country, what is true is that where you happen to be born largely determines your life outcomes and opportunities. And we reject that and say that is not right or just. Pre-pandemic, 50% of the kids growing up in our lowest income communities in the United States of America were graduating from high school. And that is compared to 96% of kids growing up in the most affluent communities, and just 6% of kids growing up in our lowest income communities end up going to and through college. So we look at this picture and we say, this is just not right. We all can agree as Americans that every child deserves an equal chance in life. This is a massive systemic problem that requires lots of interventions. And what Teach for America does is we contribute leadership, exceptional, equity-oriented leadership. We go out and we find, folks and who want to be on this journey and want to be part of a movement of people who reject this. We have them teach in urban and rural America for at least 2 years. And the idea is that they will go on to be lifelong advocates, change agents, fighting for equity and justice to ensure that every child truly does have an equal chance in life. And we've been up to this for about 30 years now, and our network now is about 65,000 strong, including core members and alums, and 80% of our alumni who've joined us have their careers in education or have a career serving a low-income community today.
And from what I understand, many of the Teach for America teachers come out of college, they graduate, and they commit to teaching at an urban or rural school for 2 years.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
You yourself went through the program in 1998. What made you interested in pursuing a career in education?
Well, Guy, my story is quite personal. I grew up in South Texas, in the beautiful South Texas in the Rio Grande Valley, right on the Texas-Mexico border. And that's where my story and interest begins. My mom came to the United States from Mexico at the age of 17 with a formal 8th grade education. She quickly figured out the pathway to opportunity in this country is education. So she'll often tell us, my first most important decision as a young adult was deciding I was going to marry a man with a college degree because I knew my kids' lives would be different, which is quite literally how she chose my father. It's a true story. They're still together 48 years later. Dad's a first generation college graduate. Anyway, I was the kid that did everything right in high school. I ended up in college in the Midwest at a liberal arts small college, DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana, that literally changed my life. And the short story is that when I got there, I thought, gosh, the hardest part of this is going to be adapting to just a very different place. At the time, DePaul was 3% Latino, 5% Black. But I quickly realized that was not the hard part. The hard part was coming to understand I was underprepared for the rigors of college, which is shocking because I was an A-plus student. I was student body president. I was a student athlete. I did everything right. But it was a fundamentally different context and rigor expected of me. I didn't think I was going to make it. I called my mom a few months in and said, Mom, I may not be cut out for this. Maybe I'm not college material. She told me that was ridiculous and that I wasn't welcome home with the support of my dad until I completed my degree from DePaul University. And so the only way to get to the other side was to go through it, and I did, but it was at the end of that, and I ended up thriving. So I had a very hard first year, and then I was thriving like, competitive with every other kid. And I was going to be a lawyer. That was the path I was on. But then I started to get curious about how was it so that I struggled so much and that no one, like the system shouldn't exist, that you do everything right and yet you almost, don't make it. And that's when I got introduced to the systemic inequities that exist in our country, how it plays out for kids growing up in my community. And that's what drew me to Teach for America. I got to know about this group of folks who just are so deeply committed to creating a different reality, have this deep belief in our kids, are unwavering about the determination to do something different and create a different context alongside, their colleagues and in our communities. And so I got hooked and I joined the Corps in 1998 and I've been on staff now for nearly 20 years.
Wow. And now the CEO of the organization.
That's right. For the last 5.5 years. Yes.
Yeah. The story you tell of your mom saying, you got to finish. The only way through is through reminds me of that Robert Frost poem. And I'm paraphrasing, where he essentially says the only way through is through, which is often, unfortunately, the answer for challenging moments. I want to dive into this year because there's so much to unpack. This has been I think it's an understatement to say the most challenging academic year in modern U.S. history, right?
That's right.
Walk us through what started to happen and how you began to figure out what you needed to do in February and March, when it would become clear that all of these teachers that are, under your sort of supervision would not be able to teach these children face to face.
Yeah. So, Guy, what's been important, there's so much to say about the moment, but these inequities that there's a bright light being shown on them now have existed pre-COVID, right? And so I think people started to realize all that schools hold. People started, I was watching suddenly our own teachers scrambling, saying, how are my kids going to eat? I mean, they rely on school to eat. They rely on all these social services at schools in order to get their social, emotional, and learning needs met all at the same time. And then the realization that we just don't have the infrastructure to pivot to a virtual. Most districts, most schools don't have that infrastructure to just pivot. And then how do you take care of the teachers throughout all of this? And boy, if we talk about resilience, let's talk about our educators in this moment. And so it's been remarkable. So right away, we pivot to offering virtual spaces, for our school leaders, our teachers, in order to support them through this. I mean, the big, very practical decision we had to pivot to is the way we train our teachers. As we talked about earlier, we go out and recruit these folks, and then we are beyond our rigorous recruitment process. We train them and we support them. And so our whole model requires in person. And so our training model is working with school districts, and our teachers actually teach during the school district with students. And that's a core part of how we do our work. And we have to quickly figure out how to do that virtually. So designed a new curriculum in 9 weeks, and really our organization came together to really step up and meet the moment for our kids, because we wanted to be able to obviously provide a cohort of educators into classrooms this fall. And so we're able to do that. One of the biggest needs that still exist today, there's two things on my mind. Like one is so many of our kids didn't have access to hotspots and broadband. And still today, 10 months into this thing, 15 to 16 million kids still do not have access to learning. And that is one of the biggest injustices that is just not okay. You know, we've been talking about the digital divide for decades now, and this has been the moment. I mean, you know, having access to a device, having access to broadband is like having pencil and paper. We used to say, what are the basics? These are the basics now, and we still have that. And we still have about 1 to 3 million kids that have not been engaged. Like, we don't know where they are because they haven't been engaged since March in any kind of learning. And so schools are still looking for many kids, and that's the reality that we're still facing right now.
I mean, when we are facing the reality that 15 to 16 million children do not have access to broadband internet, and probably I'm assuming that many of your teachers are encountering that reality in some of the schools they're in, because they're teaching in some of the poorest communities in the country. What do they do? How do they, what options do the teachers have to reach these kids?
Right. So, you know, what I'm observing from our network is we're just watching heroes play out everywhere, and communities come together. So in some places, you know, folks just are like, it's just not okay. And so they themselves are figuring out, how do they raise the money? How do they partner with the right people to get our kids the devices and the connectivity? But it's a true systemic problem. And so what we're seeing instead in some districts is, I mean, folks are handing out worksheets, you know, like, and there's no engagement with the child. And so what we are looking at, and we have to be so clear-eyed about, is the fact that we are on track to leaving a whole generation behind when we think about academics. And this is not even dealing with the social and emotional wellness of our kids. I mean, we've got to get centered and grounded in the fact that there is so much loss, so much trauma, so much fear when we think about all the crises. We're talking about the pandemic. There's an economic crisis. There is an environmental disasters happening. There's a racial reckoning. All of these things, you know who they're impacting the most? They're impacting our kids in urban and rural America. And the context in which they're working in, our kids are having to work. They're watching their parents, grandparents as their jobs. They have to go work. They can't be engaging in the virtual learning, don't always have the supports to do it. And so that's the reality that we're facing with now. And I think you've probably seen the stories where kids are going to McDonald's and parents are sitting outside of restaurants to make sure that kids can engage. And we still have the reality where, you know, one family might have one phone and they're all trying to do virtual learning through one phone. And that's just unacceptable. And this has to be a national priority that we really solve at a systemic level.
I have no doubt, and I think that you have no doubt, that we will begin to see the long-term effects of this over the next years and decades, in how children, in the numbers of children who were left behind. I do want to ask you though, and I don't want to be overly sunny here in any way, and not in any way to minimize the gravity of what has happened, but have you seen, what kinds of creative things have you seen teachers try to do this year to do anything they can despite the overwhelming challenges they are facing and that the kids are facing?
Yeah, there's so much good creativity, Guy, that is happening. And we should, my wish is that we would really be able to elevate that and help people learn from all the good things that are happening. I mean, I'm watching some schools, you know, the once I see most effective educators, they center students, like they're really empathetic and trying to figure out, okay, what is the reality of where kids are? And then they're just creating flexible schedules and way of interacting. So we were talking about some kids actually do have to work to support their families. And so schools are saying, hey, you go work, we're going to offer different times for engagement in learning. And so when you fast forward and you think the status quo wasn't working for many of our kids already, they were bored, they were disengaged, you know, it wasn't really helping them learn, lead, and thrive. How can we continue to build on that and take that forward where you have schooling that allows kids to work, that allow kids to engage in various ways based on their own individual needs and interests? Another thing that I'm watching is, you know, when schools are really centering their content, you know, what kids are engaging in the world, our kids, they want to be talking about that. And so when, contest is experiential, when they're engaging community members into the actual lessons, and it's real, it's relevant, kids are able to even engage in problem solving in their local context with, realities of the economic downturn. How would you go help this business not close down given what is happening locally, and what does all that mean for math, economics? And so there's lots of cool things happening like that. I was listening to a school leader talk about their school who they had good technology infrastructure when this all happened. Every kid had a device. And so that wasn't the issue. They really focused on building the infrastructure with relationships. Relationships are everything right now. Like you truly cannot be effective as an educator unless you have strong relationships. And so they quickly said every adult in this building is, no matter what, you're a counselor, you're a principal, every adult is going to be assigned a pod of kids at our school, about 10 kids. And you are responsible for building a relationship. There's mutual accountability for what the school's doing well, real connection with the family and the students. And so you're able to constantly adapt and figure out how do we, meet our kids' needs in the moment. And so there's lots of cool things like that we can just be learning from. And the biggest thing I would say is, gosh, if we could just center our students in this moment to really figure out how to move forward, I think we'd have major breakthroughs.
Elisa, we're getting a lot of questions for you, and I want to get to some of those questions. And many of them revolve around the following topics. So let me try to paraphrase. This includes a question from Lynn Harper via Facebook. Roughly half of America's public school kids identify as people of color, right?
Yes, correct.
But only 1 in 5 teachers do right now. And as you know, there are studies that show that children of color often perform better in standardized tests when at least one of their teachers is the same race. As you know, and I talked about this with Wendy Kopp when she was on the show in 2017, the founder of TFA.
Yeah.
There's been a long time criticism of TFA that it places often white, middle class, upper middle class educators in communities of color and in areas where people are of lower socioeconomic status. What is TFA, and you're aware of these criticisms and critiques, and we're getting questions about this from our listeners. What is TFA doing to meet the critics and to recruit more teachers of color?
It's such an important question. I appreciate you raising it. So, I'm happy to say that over the last 6 years, we have fielded a core that is at least 50% people of color. This last year was just over 50% people of color. And because we understand the importance of this and have worked really hard to put forward the resources to ensure that we are able to attract a strong, racially, ethnically, and socioeconomically diverse core. And so I would say we are now amongst the largest and actually most diverse, ethnically and diverse and racially diverse group of educators going into low-income communities. And further, about a third of our new core members are first-generation college graduates. So this is something that we have taken on, believe it's so important, and have it as a top priority, and it's a commitment that we will continue to carry forward.
Are you having any challenges in recruiting right now, given how challenging it is to teach? Have you seen a drop off in applications? Have you seen people withdrawing from the program?
Yeah, so we are in the middle of our recruitment season right now. To answer your first question about people dropping out, the answer to that is no. The resilience of the educators who just know their role is so important. And in the midst of a lot of chaos, as you can imagine, Guy, and for us, as you said earlier, we're in 37 states and Washington, D.C., with very different policies and very different rules. So some of our core members are facing realities where they are having to report to schools where there is no requirement of a mask. There are no, safety precautions than other extremes that, just are not in person. And so it's just so much to manage, and our folks have just continued to show up, and we continue to figure out how do we really hold our educators in this moment, the safety for them and our students, at the same time. In terms of the recruitment, we're in the middle of the season. We are watching that, we're having to recruit virtually, which is completely new and different for us and as it is for everybody else. And we're watching timelines get pushed into the spring as folks are trying to figure out employers are trying to figure out who to recruit. And so we're seeing timelines delayed. We do expect to have a smaller core this year because we are managing all of these, all of the realities of COVID-19. But we're optimistic about folks, stepping up and wanting to be part of the solution and realizing, if you want to have an impact, there is no greater impact than teaching in classrooms and really coming to understand all the inequities. I call teaching, the ground zero, where you get to see all the inequities playing out for our kids and you get to do something about it.
This is a question from Gabby Barakat, also from Facebook. Gabby is a junior in college, very interested in pursuing this program post-grad, but doesn't know how it works. Can you briefly explain how it works and a bit about the application process?
Sure. So you can go on www.teachforamerica.org, click to apply to Teach for America. So you apply. We have a process by which we will do a virtual interview that's a few hours long. And the process is pretty rigorous. One of the big parts of our entire model is, being really rigorous on the front end because where we're placing our teachers, and our first promise is to ensure that our kids get the education they deserve. We really want to make sure that we are recruiting and accepting someone that, is going to be successful. And we have now lots of data and evidence when it comes to skills and mindsets, orientations, that are really critical. And we study our best teachers that continue to refine our model. So that's step number one, recruit. You go through a rigorous selection process. And then we have a training where we will train our teachers on the fundamentals of great teaching, things that include the science of reading to how to, how to approach the classroom in a trauma-informed ways to ensuring there is a clear approach to racial equity and cultural relevance and how we approach our classrooms. And after that training, we support our teachers. So every core member, who's what we call our teachers, will get supports in the region. There's national supports, there's regional supports that ensure that our teachers are successful with their kids, are learning from other teachers who are teaching in their content area, and really just have the emotional support and the inspiration of an entire network who's getting up every morning to pursue educational equity and excellence for their kids.
This year, the past year and this school year and half of last school year will ultimately give us so much data and information about the needs and the gaps. And you mentioned the idea that a device and access to the internet is like having a pencil and paper. It is absolutely essential for students today. And I suspect that will hopefully inform policy decisions going forward when this is done. With everything that's happened during the pandemic and the onset of digital learning, what do you think teaching will look like when this is over?
Well, Guy, my hope is that teaching looks very different as a norm than it did before, that this is a chance for us to really lean into what a reinvention, and I think it would be just such a massive missed opportunity if we just try to go back to how it was. We really don't want to do that, right? And when we center on a 21st century global society and what our kids need to learn critical thinking skills. Our kids need to know the difference between facts and opinion. Our kids need to be compassionate and empathize. They need to learn how to work with, people who are very different than them. And so these are all skills, and they have to be adaptive. They have to be prepared to do jobs that we don't even know what they're going to be in the next 10 years. And so when you think about that, we think, gosh, teaching, the learning has to be relevant. And if kid has access to a device, then there's the role of the teacher changes, right? Too many times still, it's the teacher giving information. Well, the kids have access to all the information. And so it allows you to then start to think about how can we be creative and think about learning differently? How do we involve the community in learning and teaching for our children? And how do we personalize our children's experience so that we're really stoking their interest and their passions? We're allowing that to really take hold and fostering things like collaboration and teamwork, all these things that we know are really important. And so my hope is that as we go back to this, I mean, I think technology will play a role. I think there's a role, there's a need for that. It's like not, it's a tool. It's not the answer to anything, but it's a way that allows us to more effectively meet the needs of our kids, give them access to the world, and foster maximize in this moment.
So many of us have been working and also trying to help our kids with school from home this year.
Yes.
I count myself among those, and I know you've got 4 children yourself. As a parent and also as an education leader, what advice do you have for parents who are trying to make virtual learning work for their kids?
Yeah, well, there's nothing easy about this, as you said, Guy. We had to do that in the spring, and thankfully my kids have been back in school physically since September. But one of the things that I think has been really great is that parents are really getting proximate to what it means to be a teacher. And so the level of just empathy and compassion, what it takes to do this well is a topic of conversation. So we're literally having this conversation all across the country, which I think should then help us lead to questions of, the role of the teacher and, what is required of them and all the policies that might become discussable around what it takes to ensure that we are, fielding great teachers, supporting them, ensuring that, they are retained. But as for the parent, I think it just depends on the situation. I know that it was so difficult. My husband and I are both former educators, where I consider myself an educator today. And it was very hard for us to meet the needs of our kids, given the roles that we also have. And so I just think parents need to, be reasonable, have to really be asking kids more than anything, how are they doing, and getting them access to content that is relevant, that gets them excited about learning, that gets them curious. And so that's what that's what we were focused on. And there are so many great programs out there right now, Khan Academy. There's these access to tutoring programs that are rigorous, they're accessible, they're easy to get access to. And so, and so many resources out there. And so I would just, try to lower the pressure for everybody a bit and just focus on the things that matter the most. And more than anything, we're watching our most effective educators, just are approaching all of this with a very humanistic orientation first, and meeting our kids where they are to figure out how to get into the learning and the academics of this all.
And just a plug for Khan Academy, we've had Sal Khan on the show. It is an incredible platform.
Incredible.
Both of my children use it. I make them use it. They actually.
So do mine.
It's amazing. It's an incredible platform and a gift to the world. And so that is an amazing resource. One thing that we spoke about before we went live was something that both of us do. We implemented in our family a no screen Saturday rule back in February, March. And we have been really consistent about this. So Friday night, we lock up all of our devices and we don't bring them back out until Sunday. And it forces us to live like a family lived before the internet on Saturdays, which means we're bored. We play board games.
That's right.
We go on walks or hikes if we can, if it's not raining. We read. Sometimes my boys fight a little bit, but it's been really important for us because all of us are on a screen, children and adults, now from morning until night. And if you can do it, not everybody can, but if you can do it and you're able to lock the screen away for a day or even half a day, it can be life-changing. And I know that you do something similar to that.
We do, for the same reasons. We do it on Sundays, where we say it's just no technology day. It's our day of also worship. We do our church, and we also go hike, and it's just a day to be together. And it has been a huge, just a huge lever for change and connection for our family as well. And we end up spending a lot of time outside. We're in Houston, Texas, so the weather is very kind to us. And so I would highly recommend that too for folks where it's possible, because our kids are obviously they're even my kids that are in school, they're using their computers for their learning. And so it's a huge breakthrough. And then I also implemented, Guy, I was telling you this in the spring when we were trying to figure out how to do the homeschooling for 4 kids. We started saying that kids weren't allowed to just get on their computers until they had 15,000 steps. So what it meant is that first thing in the morning, kids would go for a run, walk. We would all do just exercise for an hour at least. And then the kids would have to do a little bit more than that. And that just got everybody moving, and it just changed the energy of the house and made it a bit more manageable.
It's a great idea. Get a fitness tracker for your kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Elisa Villanueva Beard, CEO of Teach for America. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you everybody for watching. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all your questions. I know there was questions about how many people stay on to become educators. Elisa addressed that earlier. About 80% of TFA alums stay on in the education space. So that was more or less the answer. Thank you all for watching. A couple quick announcements. We have been producing this series since last March when the shutdowns began. And we do this every week, every Thursday. We've got more virtual events in the works for this spring, including some live events, some really awesome stuff. But we need to hear your ideas. We'd love to hear your ideas. So please take our survey. We're going to include a link to that survey in all of our social platforms on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever you're watching. Look out for that link. And we're going to be doing in-depth focus groups, and I might be popping into some of those focus groups. So please consider joining that. Also, be sure to check out this Monday's episode of How I Built This. It's with the founders of Patreon. It's an incredible story of how they reimagined what being a professional artist could look like. Next week on Monday, the story of Jazzercise. If you grew up in the 80s, you know Jazzercise. It is alive and well. It is still incredibly successful. The founder of Jazzercise is 75 years old. An incredible person. It's an amazing story. Also, if you're a fan of How I Built This, be sure to check out my new book, How I Built This. It's available wherever you buy books. Thank you again, everybody, for watching. Elisa, thank you again for being with us, and we'll see you all next week.
It was a pleasure. Be safe.